The family group chat had been silent for 6 months. Not a single message, not even for my birthday last April. I scrolled through the last conversation, dated November 15th. My sister Colette had announced her engagement. Everyone had responded with congratulations, heart emojis, excited messages about wedding plans. I'd sent my own congratulations. No one had acknowledged it. That was when I realized I'd been quietly removed from their lives. Not dramatically, just gradually faded out like I'd never mattered at all. My brother Austin had stopped returning my calls 3 months before that. My mother, Lorraine, had become conveniently busy whenever I suggested meeting for lunch. My father, Harold, communicated only through brief, formal text messages. I'd committed an unforgivable sin in their eyes. I'd chosen a career they didn't respect. While Austin climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious investment firm, and Colette married into a family of successful attorneys, I was 34 years old writing video game storylines, creating fictional worlds while they built real empires. They'd made their judgment clear through silence. What they didn't know was that silence had just become very expensive for them. My name is Jordan Mackenzie, and I'd spent my entire life being the family disappointment. Austin was 41, brilliant with numbers, ruthless in business. He lived in a penthouse downtown, drove expensive cars, attended exclusive events. Everything our parents had dreamed their son would become. Colette was 37, beautiful and calculating. She'd married Preston Whitfield, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the state. Her life was charity galas, designer clothes, influential connections. Then there was me, the youngest, the creative one, the failure. I'd studied creative writing in college, while my family hoped I'd switch to business or law. I'd taken an entry-level position at Phantom Ridge Studios, a small gaming company, while they waited for me to pursue something serious. 10 years later, I was still writing game narratives, still living in a modest apartment, still single, still struggling financially. My family had stopped hiding their disappointment around year 5. By year 8, they'd stopped pretending to care about my work at all. The group chat removal had been the final confirmation. I was an embarrassment they'd rather forget. But 3 days ago, everything had changed. The meeting had been scheduled for 9 in the morning. I'd arrived at Apex Entertainment's headquarters in the city, nervous and uncertain why they'd requested my presence. Apex Entertainment was massive. They produced the biggest games in the industry, billion-dollar franchises that dominated global markets. "Mr. Mackenzie," the receptionist had said warmly, "they're ready for you in the executive conference room." I'd followed her through hallways lined with awards and posters of famous game titles. My heart had pounded with each step. Inside the conference room sat 5 executives, including CEO Damien Cross himself. "Jordan," Damien had stood, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. We've been following your work at Phantom Ridge for years." I'd barely managed to respond professionally. "Your narrative design is exceptional. The world building, character development, emotional depth. You create stories that stay with players long after they finish." "Thank you," I'd said, still confused about why I was there. "We want you to lead narrative development for our new flagship franchise. Complete creative control. 3-year contract." He'd slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract offering $12 million over 3 years. I'd stared at the number, certain I'd misread it. $12 million, $4 million per year. "This is our most ambitious project," Damien had explained. "We're creating an entirely new universe. Multiple games, potential film adaptations, merchandise. We need someone who understands how to build worlds that matter. Your portfolio demonstrates exactly that ability." My hands had trembled slightly as I reviewed the contract details. Full creative authority over all narrative elements. Generous production budget. Percentage of future revenue. My name prominently credited. "We'd need you to start in 3 months," another executive had added. "That gives you time to finish your current obligations and relocate if necessary." Relocate, I'd asked. We'd prefer you work from our headquarters here in the city, but we're flexible. The contract includes relocation assistance, housing allowance, and signing bonus. The signing bonus alone was $500,000. Can I have time to consider? I'd asked, though I already knew my answer. Of course, we'd like your decision within 2 weeks. I'd left that meeting in a daze. On the train home, I'd read the contract 17 times, making sure it was real. It was real. My family's disappointment was about to become very, very expensive for them. I'd spent that evening researching everything about the project. Apex Entertainment had announced the new franchise publicly, a science fiction epic called Exodus Protocol. Early concept art looked incredible. Industry analysts predicted it would be the biggest gaming launch in 5 years. And they wanted me to write it. Me, the family failure who wrote silly game stories. I'd called my best friend, Felix, immediately. 12 million, he'd shouted through the phone. Jordan, that's insane, that's incredible. I keep thinking I dreamed it, I'd admitted. Are you going to tell your family? That question had stopped me cold. My family. The people who'd stopped communicating with me 6 months ago, who'd made it clear my career was an embarrassment. No, I decided, not yet. But this is huge news. Surely they'd want to know. I'd thought about the silent group chat, the unreturned calls, the way my mother had looked at me during our last family dinner, disappointed and distant. Let them find out on their own, I'd said quietly. Felix had understood immediately. You're going to let them see it when it's announced publicly. Exactly. They decided I wasn't worth their time. They can learn about my success the same way strangers will. It wasn't revenge, not really, but it was justice. I'd signed the contract 3 days later, after having an attorney review every detail. The signing bonus hit my account within 48 hours. $500,000, more money than I'd earned in the last 3 years combined. I'd paid off my student loans immediately, bought a reliable car to replace my dying vehicle, put a down payment on a small house closer to Apex Entertainment's headquarters. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security. But I'd told no one except Felix and my attorney. The public announcement wouldn't come for another 6 weeks. When Apex Entertainment planned a major press event to unveil Exodus Protocol details. Until then, I'd kept working at Phantom Ridge, finishing my current projects professionally. My colleagues had noticed something different about me, a confidence, a calm certainty, but I deflected questions. The hardest part was maintaining silence when I wanted to shout my success from rooftops. During this waiting period, I'd received exactly 2 text messages from my family. One from my father, hope you're doing well. One from Colette, wedding planning is stressful, you wouldn't understand. That second message had stung, the casual dismissal, the assumption that my life was too insignificant to include stress or importance. I deleted both messages without responding. Soon enough, they'd understand exactly what they'd missed. 5 weeks after signing the contract, Apex Entertainment sent the press release schedule. The announcement would happen on a Thursday evening, timed for maximum media coverage. They'd planned an elaborate reveal event. Industry journalists, gaming influencers, major media outlets. Damian Cross would present the project vision, show concept art and early footage, then introduce me as lead narrative designer. We're positioning you as a rising star in game narrative, the PR director had explained. Your background, your journey from small studio to major franchise, it's a compelling story. My face would be everywhere. Gaming websites, entertainment news, industry publications. Anyone searching my name would find dozens of articles about the massive contract, the prestigious opportunity, the creative achievement. Including my family. The thought filled me with equal parts satisfaction and nervousness. This wasn't about making them feel bad. It was about proving they'd been wrong about me. 2 days before the announcement, I'd received an unexpected call from Austin. Jordan, he'd said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of forced politeness. "It's been a while." 6 months, I'd replied calmly. "Right, well, Mother mentioned you might like to come to dinner this Sunday. Colette's engagement party planning meeting." After 6 months of silence, suddenly I was invited to dinner. Suspicious timing. "Why now?" I'd asked directly. "Can I reach out to my brother?" "You could have 6 months ago." Austin had paused, clearly not expecting me to push back. "Look, I know we've been distant, but you're still family." "Am I?" The question came out sharper than intended. "Of course you are. We've all been busy with our lives, you understand." Too busy to send a single text. Too busy to acknowledge my birthday. Too busy to respond when I'd shared something I was proud of. "I'll think about it," I'd said, not committing. "Mother really wants you there. She's been worried about you." That was interesting. Lorraine had refused 3 lunch invitations in 4 months, but now she was worried. "Tell her I'll let her know by Saturday," I'd replied, then ended the call before Austin could probe further. Felix had laughed when I told him. "They have no idea, do they?" "None. The announcement is Thursday. Dinner is Sunday. By Sunday, every article about Exodus Protocol will mention my name and the contract value." "You're really going to show up and pretend you don't know they've seen the news?" "I'm not pretending anything. I'm just not bringing it up first. If they want to discuss my career suddenly, they can explain why they ignored it for years." Wednesday evening, I'd done final preparation for the announcement event. Practiced my speaking points, reviewed the presentation materials, coordinated with Apex's PR team. Tomorrow, everything would change. Thursday evening, I'd stood backstage at the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom, listening to the crowd of 300 industry professionals settling into their seats. 5 minutes, a production assistant had informed me. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Felix, from former colleagues, from friends who'd somehow heard rumors about the announcement. The lights dimmed. Damian Cross took the stage to thunderous applause. "Tonight, we're unveiling our most ambitious project in Apex Entertainment's history," he'd begun, his voice confident and commanding. "Exodus Protocol represents the future of interactive storytelling, a science fiction epic spanning multiple games, each with interconnected narratives, complex characters, and moral choices that genuinely matter." The screens flanking the stage showed concept art. Alien worlds, futuristic cities, diverse characters. The audience responded with excited murmurs. Creating this universe required finding the perfect narrative architect, someone who understands how to build stories that resonate emotionally while supporting complex gameplay, someone whose work demonstrates consistent excellence in world building and character development. My heart raced as my cue approached. "Please welcome Exodus Protocol's lead narrative designer and the creative mind who will bring this universe to life, Jordan Mackenzie." I'd walked onto that stage to applause from 300 strangers who respected my work, respected what I'd built, respected me. The presentation had gone perfectly. I'd discussed my vision for Exodus Protocol, showed narrative samples, explained how player choices would create genuinely unique experiences. Questions from journalists had been thoughtful and engaged. They'd asked about my background, my influences, my approach to interactive storytelling. "Your previous work at Phantom Ridge Studios demonstrated remarkable emotional depth," one journalist had noted. "How will you scale that approach for a franchise of this magnitude?" I'd answered confidently, comfortable discussing my craft with people who actually cared about understanding it. After the event, I'd done a dozen individual interviews. Gaming websites, entertainment channels, industry magazines. Each one asked variations of the same questions, but also about the contract itself. "This is one of the largest contracts for a narrative designer in gaming history," one reporter had said. "How does it feel to receive this kind of recognition?" "Validating," I'd answered honestly. "I've spent 10 years developing my craft while many people questioned whether it was a legitimate career. This opportunity proves that storytelling matters, that it has value, that it's worth investing in. That quote would appear in 17 different articles. By 10 p.m., my phone had exploded with notifications. Friends, former professors, old colleagues, people I'd lost touch with years ago. Everyone congratulating me, sharing articles, expressing amazement. Still nothing from my family. Friday morning, I'd woken to find my name trending on gaming Twitter. Articles about the announcement had spread across dozens of websites. Apex Entertainment signs Jordan McKenzie to $12 million deal for Exodus Protocol. Rising star, how Jordan McKenzie became gaming's most sought-after narrative designer. From small studio to major franchise, the Jordan McKenzie story. Each article detailed my background, my work history, the scope of the contract. Several included quotes from industry professionals praising my previous projects. My phone rang at 8:15 a.m. Colette. I'd let it go to voicemail. She'd called again at 8:30, then Austin at 9, then my mother at 9:15. All voicemails, all suddenly urgent to talk after 6 months of silence. I'd listened to my mother's message first. Jordan, sweetie, I just saw the most amazing news. Why didn't you tell us? Call me back immediately. We need to celebrate properly. I'm so proud of you. Proud? After years of subtle disappointment and months of complete silence, suddenly she was proud. Austin's message was shorter. Hey, need to talk to you about something important. Call when you can. Colette's was the most transparent. Jordan, oh my God, I had no idea you were working on something so huge. We absolutely need you at Sunday's dinner. No excuses. Preston's family will be there and I'm dying to tell them about my incredibly successful brother. Incredibly successful. 6 months ago, I'd been too insignificant to warrant responses. I'd spent Friday fielding interview requests and calls from my suddenly interested family. I'd responded to the interviews professionally and ignored my family completely. By Friday evening, they'd stopped calling and started texting. Mother, Jordan, please call me back. I don't understand why you're ignoring us. Austin, this is childish. We're trying to congratulate you. Colette, seriously, you're really going to ignore your own family? The audacity was almost funny. They'd ignored me for 6 months, and I was childish for not immediately responding when convenient for them. Felix had come over Friday night with takeout and beer. You're really going to make them wait? He'd asked, amused. They made me wait 6 months. They can wait a weekend. What if they show up at your apartment? They don't know my address. I moved 4 months ago and never told them. Felix had laughed. You've been planning this. Not planning, just not sharing. There's a difference. Saturday morning brought more messages, increasingly frustrated. Colette, Mother is very upset. You need to respond. Austin, whatever point you're making, you've made it. Call Mother back. Harold, my father, finally weighed in. Son, your behavior is causing your mother distress. Please contact her today. Causing distress. My 6 months of silence from them had been fine, but 3 days from me was distressing. Saturday afternoon, I'd finally responded to my mother's texts with a single message. I'll come to dinner tomorrow. We can talk then. Her response had been immediate. Oh, thank goodness. 6 o'clock, don't be late. Sunday arrived with perfect irony. I'd spent the morning reviewing more articles about the Apex Entertainment announcement. Industry analysts were already predicting Exodus Protocol would be revolutionary. Several articles specifically highlighted my journey from small studio to major franchise, painting it as an inspirational story about persistence and talent being recognized. Mackenzie spent a decade perfecting his craft at indie studios, one article read. While others might have seen his career choice as risky, he consistently produced exceptional work. Apex Entertainment's investment acknowledges what industry insiders have known for years. Jordan McKenzie is a generational talent in narrative design. Generational talent. I'd saved that article to show my mother if necessary. I dressed carefully for dinner. Nothing too fancy but successful. confident. The drive to my parents' house took 40 minutes. The same house I'd grown up in, where I'd been made to feel inadequate for choosing creativity over commerce. Austin's expensive car was already in the driveway, so was Colette's luxury SUV. I'd parked behind them, took a deep breath, and walked toward a conversation 6 months in the making. My mother had answered the door with an enormous smile and immediate hug. "Jordan, let me look at you. You look wonderful." The enthusiasm was jarring, after months of disinterest. Inside, the family waited in the formal living room. Austin stood by the fireplace, drink in hand. Colette sat with Preston, both dressed like they were attending a yacht club event. My father occupied his usual chair, newspaper folded beside him. "Jordan," Colette had rushed over, hugging me tightly. "I've been trying to reach you all weekend. Where have you been?" "Around," I'd replied calmly. Sit," my mother had gestured toward the sofa. "I made your favorite dinner. We have so much to discuss." I'd sat, maintaining composed neutrality. They'd arranged themselves around me, everyone suddenly attentive. "So," Austin had started, clearly taking charge. "Apex Entertainment, $12 million, that's impressive." "Thank you." "Why didn't you tell us you were negotiating with them?" my mother had asked, her tone gently accusatory. "I didn't tell anyone. It was confidential until the announcement." "But we're your family," Colette had protested. "Surely you could have mentioned something." I'd looked at each of them carefully. "Like how you mentioned removing me from the family group chat, or how you mentioned being too busy to return my calls for 6 months. The room had gone silent. My mother's smile had faltered. "Jordan, that's not fair. We've all been incredibly busy with our own lives." "Too busy to send a single text." I'd kept my voice level. "Too busy to acknowledge my birthday. Too busy to respond when I shared things I was proud of." "You're being dramatic," Austin had said dismissively. "We're family. We don't need constant communication." "You're right. We don't. Which is why I didn't feel obligated to inform you about my career developments." Colette had exchanged glances with Preston. "Jordan, we're trying to celebrate with you. Why are you being difficult?" "I'm not being difficult. I'm being consistent. You decided my career wasn't worth your attention. That decision doesn't change just because the dollar amount got bigger." "That's not what happened," my father had interjected, speaking for the first time. "We've always supported your choices." The statement was so absurdly false that I'd actually laughed. "Dad, you told me 3 years ago that writing game stories was a waste of my education." Mother cried when I turned down that corporate job to stay at Phantom Ridge. Austin called my career an extended childhood phase. Austin had shifted uncomfortably. "I was concerned about your financial stability." "No, you were embarrassed. All of you were. I wasn't successful by your standards, so you gradually cut me out." My mother's eyes had filled with tears. "How can you say that?" "We love you." "Love and respect are different things," I'd replied gently. "You might love me, but you didn't respect my choices. You didn't respect my career. You didn't respect me enough to maintain basic communication." "This is ridiculous," Colette had stood, agitated. "We're trying to be supportive now. Isn't that what matters?" "Supportive now that there's money involved. Now that you can tell Preston's family about your successful brother. Where was that support when I was struggling to pay rent while building my portfolio?" Preston had finally spoken, his voice uncomfortable. "Maybe we should give you all space to talk privately." "No, stay," I'd said. "This concerns you too, apparently, since Colette wants to parade my success in front of your family." Colette's face had flushed red. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it? Your text said you were dying to tell them about your incredibly successful brother. 6 months ago, you didn't even acknowledge my existence." "Jordan," my father's voice had carried warning. "That's enough. Your mother invited you here to celebrate. Stop attacking your family." "I'm not attacking. I'm stating facts. Facts you're all uncomfortable hearing because they expose your hypocrisy." The word had hung in the air like smoke. Austin had set down his drink with deliberate control. "You've made your point. We weren't as communicative as we should have been. We apologize. Can we move forward now?" "Move forward to what?" I'd asked. "To you all pretending you always believed in me, to suddenly being included in family events because now I'm not embarrassing." "No one ever said you were embarrassing," my mother had protested weakly. "You didn't have to say it. You showed it. Every time you changed the subject when someone asked about my work. Every time you introduced me as still figuring things out. Every time you compared me to Austin and Colette's achievements." The silence was heavy with uncomfortable truth. "I came here tonight because you asked," I'd continued. "But I want to be clear about something. This contract doesn't change who I am. I'm the same person I was 6 months ago, the same person writing the same kind of stories. The only difference is that someone with money finally recognized the value. And we're recognizing it too," Austin had tried. "Are you? Or are you recognizing the dollar amount? Because if I'd gotten a teaching position at a university or taken a job at a small publisher, would you be this excited to reconnect?" The lack of immediate response answered my question. "That's what I thought." I'd stood, preparing to leave. "Thank you for the invitation, but I think we all know this dinner was about your comfort, not mine." "Jordan, please." My mother had reached for my hand. "Don't leave like this. Stay for dinner. Let's talk properly." I'd looked at my mother's hand on mine, at her face, genuinely distressed now, at my family, all uncomfortable and defensive. Part of me wanted to leave, to let them sit with their realization that money shouldn't determine worth. But another part, the part that still loved them despite everything, knew that walking out would close a door I might never reopen. "Fine," I'd sat back down. "I'll stay for dinner, but we're having an honest conversation, all of us." Relief had flooded my mother's face. "Of course, whatever you need." Over dinner, pot roast, my actual favorite, the conversation had slowly shifted. The defensiveness had gradually given way to something more genuine. "I read several articles about your work," my father had admitted halfway through the meal. "About the games you've written. The reviews were impressive. Players talked about crying during certain story moments." "That's always been my goal," I'd replied. "Creating emotional experiences that stay with people." "I'll admit, I didn't understand that before," he'd continued. "I saw video games as children's entertainment. I didn't realize they could be art." It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. Colette had spoken next, her voice smaller than usual. "I'm sorry for that text, about wedding planning stress. That was condescending." "Yes, it was. I was projecting. My life looks perfect, but Preston and I fight constantly about his family's expectations. I envied that you chose something you actually care about." That admission had surprised me. Colette, who seemed to have everything, was envious of my choices. Austin had been the last to speak, and his words had come slowly. "I called your career an extended childhood phase because I was jealous. I hate my job. I hate the politics, the meaningless achievements, the empty victories. You had courage to choose differently. I resented that courage." The conversation had continued for 2 hours. Real conversation, without performance or pretense. My mother had cried, apologizing for making me feel inadequate. "I was scared for you. I wanted you to have security because I grew up without it. I didn't see that I was crushing something beautiful." By the time I'd left that night, nothing was completely resolved, but foundations had been laid. Driving home, I'd felt lighter, not because they'd apologized, though that mattered, but because I'd stood up for myself. I demanded respect instead of begging for approval. My phone had buzzed with a text from Austin. "Thank you for staying tonight, for giving us a chance to do better. I mean that sincerely." Then Colette, "I'm proud of you, not because of the money, because you never gave up on what you believed in." And finally, my mother, "I love you, Jordan, I always have. I'm sorry I made you doubt that." I'd pulled over, reading those messages twice. They weren't perfect, but they were real. The next 3 months transformed my relationship with my family completely. They didn't just add me back to the group chat, they actively engaged with what I shared. When I'd posted about starting at Apex Entertainment, Austin had responded with genuine interest, asking about the creative process. When I'd shared early concept art from Exodus Protocol, Colette had commented enthusiastically, asking questions that showed she'd actually looked at the images. My mother had called weekly, asking about my work without comparing it to my siblings' achievements. My father had surprised me most. He'd bought one of the games I'd written for Phantom Ridge and played through the entire story. Then he'd called to discuss specific narrative moments that had moved him. The scene where the protagonist confronts their past, he'd said. That was powerful writing, son. I felt that character's pain. That conversation had meant more than any amount of money. But the real test had come when Colette's wedding planning had intensified. I want you involved, she'd told me during a coffee meeting. Not as an obligation, as my brother. I want your input on things, your presence at events. Is that okay? As long as it's genuine. I'd replied. It is, I promise. And it had been. I'd attended tastings, helped choose flowers, offered opinions on venue decorations. Not because I was suddenly successful enough to include, but because I was her brother. 6 months after the Apex Entertainment announcement, my family hosted a dinner specifically to celebrate my first day on the new project. They'd invited Felix, my mentor from Phantom Ridge, even a few colleagues from Apex Entertainment. It was a genuine celebration of my achievement, not a performance for their benefit. During the dinner, Austin had stood to make a toast. 6 months ago, Jordan came to dinner and called us out for our hypocrisy. He was right to do it. We'd let our definitions of success blind us to his actual achievements. We'd let conventional thinking override support for our own family member. He'd looked directly at me. You've taught me something important. That courage isn't choosing the safe path everyone approves of. Courage is choosing the right path even when people don't understand. I'm grateful you had that courage. And I'm sorry it took money for us to see your value. The room had been silent, except for my mother quietly crying. To Jordan, Austin had raised his glass. Who was always successful, we just weren't looking properly. To Jordan, everyone had echoed. Later that evening, my father had pulled me aside. I've been thinking about retiring early, maybe pursuing something I've always wanted to do. What's that? I'd asked. Woodworking. I've always loved creating things with my hands, but I told myself it wasn't practical, wasn't respectable. He'd smiled sadly. You've shown me that practical isn't everything. 9 months into my contract with Apex Entertainment, the first trailer for Exodus Protocol had released publicly. The response was overwhelming. Millions of views in the first day, enthusiastic reactions across social media, industry analysts predicting record-breaking sales. But the moment that mattered most was smaller. My mother had called after watching the trailer. Jordan, I cried at the ending. That speech the main character gives about choosing hope despite everything. That was beautiful. Thanks, Mom. I mean it. I finally understand what you've been building all these years. You create meaning. That's more valuable than any corporate position or impressive title. That phone call had validated 10 years of doubt. Colette's wedding had happened around the same time. Preston's family had indeed asked about my career, but Colette's introduction had been perfect. This is my brother, Jordan. He's a narrative designer for Apex Entertainment. He's creating the story for what's going to be the biggest game franchise in 5 years. No embarrassment, no dismissal, just genuine pride. During the reception, Preston's uncle, a wealthy venture capitalist, had asked about my work. I'd explained the creative process, the challenges of interactive storytelling, the satisfaction of creating emotional experiences. He'd listened intently, then said, My son wants to be a filmmaker. I've been pushing him toward business school, but hearing you talk about creative work with such passion, maybe I've been wrong. 1 year after signing the contract, Apex Entertainment had released the first gameplay demo to select media outlets. The reviews were exceptional, praising particularly the narrative depth and character development. Jordan Mackenzie has created something special, one review read. Exodus Protocol doesn't just tell a story, it makes you part of one. The emotional weight of player choices demonstrates what video game narratives can achieve when given proper resources and respect. The article had been framed and hung in my parents' house, right next to Austin's MBA degree and Colette's wedding photo. That placement meant everything. My relationship with my family wasn't perfect. We still disagreed sometimes. They still occasionally revealed old biases about creative careers. But the fundamental dynamic had changed. They saw me now, not as a disappointment who'd finally gotten lucky, but as someone who'd been valuable all along. The money had gotten their attention, but the honest conversation had earned their respect. Felix and I had dinner one evening, reflecting on everything that had happened. "Do you regret how it went down?" he'd asked. The dramatic revelation, the confrontation. I'd thought carefully. No, they needed to see their hypocrisy clearly. I needed to demand respect instead of hoping they'd offer it eventually. It was painful but necessary. And now? Now we're building something real, based on honesty, not performance. 18 months after the announcement, Exodus Protocol launched globally. The game broke sales records in its first week, generated overwhelmingly positive reviews, and established itself as a cultural phenomenon. My name appeared in countless articles, interviews, and reviews. The narrative I'd created resonated with millions of players worldwide. But the moment that struck me most was smaller. My father had completed his first woodworking project, a beautiful dining table, and called to tell me about it. "I kept thinking about what you said," he'd explained, "about choosing what matters to you, so I retired, started woodworking full-time. Your mother thinks I'm crazy, but I'm happier than I've been in 30 years. That's incredible, Dad. You inspired it, watching you stand up for your choices even when we tore you down. That took strength I didn't have, but I'm finding it now." That conversation represented everything the journey had been about. Not just my success, but the permission it gave others to choose differently. Colette had called later that week. "Preston and I are separating. His family's expectations, the pressure to be someone I'm not. I've been miserable, but I watched you choose yourself and I realized I could too." "I'm sorry you're going through that," I'd said. "Don't be. It's the right choice, a hard one but right." Even Austin had made changes, switching firms to somewhere less toxic, prioritizing meaningful work over impressive titles. 2 years after my family had stopped communicating with me, we gathered for another dinner. But this time, everything was different. Austin brought his new girlfriend, a teacher he'd met at a coffee shop, not another corporate executive. They talked about books and education reform with genuine passion. Colette came alone, confident in her independence, discussing plans to open an art gallery. "I've always loved art," she'd explained, "but I thought it wasn't serious enough. You taught me that's ridiculous." My father showed photos of his woodworking projects, orders coming in from local furniture stores. "I'm not getting rich," he'd said happily, "but I'm creating things that matter to me." My mother had smiled at all of us. "I raised 3 successful children," she'd said, "but I was measuring success wrong. Now I see it differently. You're all choosing lives that make you happy. That's the real achievement." During dinner, the conversation had flowed easily. They'd asked detailed questions about the Exodus Protocol expansion I was developing. I'd asked about Austin's new projects, Colette's gallery plans, Dad's furniture designs. We weren't performing for each other anymore. We were genuinely interested in each other's lives. As I'd driven home that night, I'd reflected on everything that had changed. The silence that had hurt so deeply had ultimately taught me something valuable. You can't control whether people see your worth, but you can control whether you see it yourself. My family remembering me when I got the contract wasn't the victory. The victory was knowing my value regardless of whether they remembered or not.